Well, let's start with a little scenario, and how it occurred. And of course, I'm almost 70, and I've been in the industry for 50 years, and I drive all the time, all over the country, and I have clients everywhere, and consider myself a pretty good driver and conscientious driver. I train people on how to drive, and we help write programs on driver safety and stuff like that. And on September 2nd, just before Labor Day, the Friday before Labor Day, early in the morning, we were heading toward Georgia on a family trip. And we were pulling a U-Haul trailer, delivering some furniture and stuff for the family. And down the road, about 2 football fields away, I saw a car off the side of the road. There was a car width shoulder. He was halfway off the shoulder, and the right side tires were in the grass. And as I was approaching him, I could see he had his right turn signal on, so he must have just pulled off of the road down there. And I eased over a little bit, about a half a lane, and 50 yards away, he pulled a hard left turn and pulled into the interstate highway. And we hit him traveling at 70 miles an hour, pulling a 4,000-pound trailer. And it was a pretty big impact. My wife said it was the understatement of the year. All I could say was, uh-oh, just before we hit him. But I started, and I'm an analyst, and we research incidents, and we do investigations, we do litigation support. We're experts at the Powerline industry. And because I'm an analyst, of course, I started analyzing, toward the end of the day. The first part of the day was taken up with surviving because the truck caught fire, and we lost consciousness several times, during that process. I remember being awake when we were sliding backwards, and I was thinking, well, at least we're not upside down. My wife is next to me, in the seat, and then we came to a stop, and I thought rescuers were right there when we came to the stop, but I'd really been unconscious for several minutes. And door opened, a rescuer said, "Truck's on fire, you got to get out, undo your seatbelt." And I could look through the broken windshield, and I could see the flames in the engine compartment and the black smoke. And I said, "Get the women out first." My sister-in-law was in the back seat, and both of them were unconscious, and the truck was on fire. I was pretty confident that I could get away, if I had to. And so we went through the whole thing, the extraction. The fire department rolled up in less than the national average time. They got the fire put out. I don't remember that because I was unconscious again. And the next time I came to, there was 2 firefighters that were helping me out of my truck, and I walked over and sat on the fender of the U-Haul trailer that was jackknifed against the back of my truck. It completely destroyed the truck, and of course the fire that started. And Gwen, my wife, and Sonia were both airlifted to New Orleans to a Trauma 1 center. And I went to the local hospital because I essentially walked away from the crash. And in the hospital later that day is when I started to analyze what happened. And I just had one very clear thought. And this is what I write about in the article. When I first started my professional career, I'd gone to the academy, and I was in the sheriff's department, and I was a sheriff's deputy. And in the academy, we took those big Crown Vics with those 428 Cobra Jet Police Interceptor engines, and we ran on skid pads. The purpose was to learn how to handle a heavy vehicle in emergency conditions. And we also had a chase track where our instructor, we were to chase our instructor, with those big Crown Vics. And one of the things that we learned was how that vehicle performs at that weight and at these speeds and in these emergency conditions. And we also learned about where to hit things and where not to hit things. And one of the important takeaways was that hit them in the front and the car will spin away. You never want to hit one in the middle because now all 4 tires are working against you, and it'll increase your impact. And I remember recalling that's exactly what I thought. I got to hit him in the wheels, hit him in the front tires. So I was a half a lane over when he came over, and I don't know if he stopped. In my memory of what happened, all I see is focusing on the front wheels. of that RAV4 is what it was, and that's where I hit him. But we hit him at a very slight angle, which set off the airbags on the right side of the pickup truck, which helped to protect my wife on the inside. And of course, later on, I started thinking more and more about that training, and it just amazed me that I recalled that. Now, I spent 2 years as a sheriff's deputy, and we did chases, and all the other kind of stuff that goes with it, but I never really put a whole lot of value against it. We just knew we were better drivers than they were, and it was because of training. I started thinking about, in the work that we do now in consulting for utilities, we do a lot of consulting on incidents and the kind of things that happen, and we help utilities develop programs where they have deficiencies. And one of the things that has happened over the years, especially during storm time, is that we have a lot of crews that perform great. They do a wonderful job while they're doing a restoration, and then on their way home, something happens and they have a wreck and a lineman dies. And over the course of my career doing investigations, I've done several big truck crashes, and some of them were fatal. And the ones that were fatal had to do with an unseat belted driver. And we have an issue in our industry is that I think it has something to do with your personal perception of the relative danger. You're in a big truck up in the air above everybody else. And we simply don't see that as having a risk to it. But they don't know what happens when a big truck like that gets out of control. And in the analysis of each of these crashes that occurred, and in one in particular, there was a seat-belted passenger and that survived the crash. And when I talked with them about the crash, he looked over at the driver, and the driver was up over the steering wheel with his head and his shoulders and his back up against the roof of the truck because they got off of the highway and simply don't realize how radical that ride is going to be. And if that happens and you're not seat belted in behind that steering wheel, nobody's controlling anything. And now you're at the mercy of the kinetic energy and the dynamics of the truck that's moving. Now, in our personal vehicles get tested by the Federal Highway Administration and the Insurance Institute, and they test our car crash worthiness at 45 miles an hour. We hit at 70 miles an hour. Seatbelts and crash systems are not tested at 70, but these worked perfectly. And I had one of my sons went back to recover the equipment out of the totaled truck, and he opened the doors and took video of everything. And one of the things that stood out to me was the exact same thing that we see in these truck crashes. There is a survivable space in that cab. Now, the Highway Institute and the insurance industry don't test big trucks. The ones that we use, the F-350s, the F-550s, for Ford, and not in particular Ford, but all of the big trucks that we use that make up our digger derricks and our bucket trucks, those cabs don't get crash tested, but they do test them in Europe. And so the designers that build these trucks have been using a lot of that information from these European tests. And what we find is that these crashes do have a survivable space. The reason why our workers don't survive is because they don't stay in that survivable space. They're ejected or they roll around on the interior of the vehicle and they receive fatal injuries because they weren't, locked in. So I've been aware of that for quite some time, but in this case, our seatbelts, the airbags, and the crush design of that Ford F-150 that we were driving ensured that the cab stayed intact, and our seatbelts and that crash system, those airbags, kept us in that survivable space. And the trooper that investigated, and he was talking to me, and he said, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've never seen a crash like this where somebody didn't die at the scene. We didn't die at the scene. And we didn't die at the scene because of the crash worthiness of that vehicle, but it wouldn't have made any difference at all if we hadn't been seatbelted in. And seatbelts make a difference. And I'm hopeful that when people read this article, when I close the article in UFP and in Incident Prevention Magazine, I close the article, it says, are you satisfied with your driver's records? And why is that? Is it because of luck? And I point out to them, your luck can run out. So we want to make that point. That survivable space is only survivable if you're seatbelted in in place. So we want those drivers to recognize that and use this as an opportunity to get that message out.